Jill,
Yes.
I finally tracked you down. We've got you on the show, which is great. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
It only took you 2 times coming back to Albania.
Well, this is it. It was worth it. It was worth it. So Jill, let's start by kind of giving people a bit of overview about you, kind of how you came to God personally, and equally into missionary work as well. So how did that all come about?
Yeah. Well, journey feels like it started a couple decades ago now. Really, I would say my point in life when I knew that Jesus was real came at definitely a low point. That season, I was 15 years old the summer that my dad passed away.
Right.
And I would say as a teenager, you just never expect for loss like that. When my dad died, I think the biggest thing I was hit with then was just the loss of time. You always, I think as a kid, just assume you have more time with your parents than you do. When I was, 15 years old, my most important thing were friendships and going to the movies and starting dating. And so when he passed away unexpectedly, it just felt like this loss that I didn't see coming. And so as the pieces would have lined up the same week as my dad's funeral, his funeral was on a Monday, and that Friday I was on a bus to the mountains of Colorado for this camp that I had signed up for because there was rock climbing, there was horseback riding, there seemed like fun adventure things to do, when really it was a week to just be broken in the mountains with God. And it was a Youth for Christ camp. There was worship every night. There was teachings every day. And in that space, I think I was allowed to really ask questions about why God allows hard things to happen. And I would say from that point on, I had a lot to figure out as a teenager, but I definitely recognized that Jesus was not only real for other people, but he was real in my life. And in a very real parallel of losing my earthly father, it felt like just the time when God stepped in to remind me that I still had a father and that he was going to fill that role. So from that place on, I've got a special, heart for the mountains and even for youth ministry, just because that's where God really met me. And it's been a journey since then. I think your other part 2 question was in ministry. How did I get started with that?
Yeah, how did that evolve? So how did you know that you were being called to mission? Is that, how did that happen?
I think sometimes being called to missions can feel like a really big lightning bolt. And for some people, it probably is. It's just a very clear call from the Lord. For me, it's honestly been a series of steps. And I've seen my call into missions as honestly taking the next step, for the last 20 years now, since Jesus first became real at that summer camp. Honestly, at that summer camp is when I had first seen a promotional video to go on a mission trip.
Right.
And I think I loved the idea of adventure. And so I signed up to go to Africa for 2 weeks with a bunch of strangers that I'd never met. And that trip to Africa got canceled, but I ended up going to the Caribbean and laughing now that we lead short-term missions. On that trip, everything you could think of that went wrong. It was a mess. We didn't have a clue what we were doing. And now that I lead ministry, I'm just reminded of God can even use the messiness of ministry, even when the leadership was not present and people were doing all sorts of terrible things on the trip. And I still was like, this is awesome. I want to do more of it. So flash forward a couple years later, I was 20 years old, working in business with my mom. I had a full-time job. I had my own apartment. A lot of things going for me, but I felt like almost this mission thing was something I needed to get out of my system. Like I never went to Africa because that first trip got canceled, and maybe going to Africa and serving was something that I just needed to do so that I could be fully in business. Like that was my mentality, to be fully present. I just needed to kind of get this off my bucket list. So I went on a 3-month mission trip, for which at 20 years old felt like long-term missions. I'm like, I'm going for so long. thinking that once I went, I could come back and really invest fully in Nebraska, where I'm from. And I would say it was when I was in Kenya in this hot church in the slums in Kibera. That is when I can really remember God saying to me, you could do this. And I didn't know at 20 years old what this meant. I knew it wasn't staying in Kibera and running a church or working in slum ministry, but it just almost opened the door that it wasn't a one and done, get it out of the way so that I could focus on what's important. I think God was redirecting that this was actually the most important thing. So that got planted in me when I was 20 years old. And it's been a journey since then, but I think there's always been something knowing that this ministry was more than just something that was one and done, but it was actually a lifestyle that God was calling me into. Yeah.
That's no, thank you very much for sharing that. And I'm interested, whenever you decided that you were going to head off, how did your family, your community, how did the church receive that? Was there a lot of support there? Was there a lot of questions or concerns?
It's a great question. I think it's different. So when I was 20 years old and going to Kenya, I remember the little church that my sister and I attended, and a sweet, Jesus-loving fellowship. My sister and I were the youth group. I mean, we were. So when I was wanting to go to Kenya, I remember feeling like I was the church missionary.
Right. Okay.
And they passed a plate around and I think collected $37, and sent me on my way. And we're so excited, but it still felt very like temporary. Like I would go for a set amount of time and then come back to life. And for a number of years when I was single, that's what ministry looked like. It was you go and you serve and you raise a certain amount of dollars and then you come back.
Yeah.
And the little church I was a part of were really supportive in spirit. Financially, I mean, they didn't have it all. But something I remember my mom always saying, especially as she would drive me to the airport and drop me off to wherever I was going next, was that if it doesn't make sense on paper, that's probably God. Right. And I think my mom gave very counter-cultural advice to most people's parents who would encourage them to go to college and get a degree first and take this straight and narrow path. And my mom was very much a believer that if it doesn't make sense to anyone else, it's probably God. And so I think I've always had her voice in me, edging me to do the daring and unexpected.
That's really good. I like that.
It looks different when you start doing it with a family. And you're married and you have a couple kids, and people's advice starts going from, great, do it now while you're young and single and have no responsibilities. And I remember hearing that tone of, because once that happens, once you're married, once you have kids, in the sweetest way possible, your life is really over.
It stops.
So you have to go have the adventures now, because it'll never happen again past that point. And I think one thing I was really grateful for doing a discipleship training school with YWAM in my early 20s was getting to see families who did it and getting to see kids in ministry and couples. And it's not everyone, but I think I needed to see it to know that it isn't, missions isn't just for 20-year-olds until you start your life.
Yeah.
That it can actually be part of what your life looks like.
Yeah.
The older I got, that's harder for people to understand. Yeah.
Do you think that's because, with the greatest respect to them, because they're coming from a loving place, but they're coming from their place of comfort? So if it's outside their comfort, they automatically think, oh, I wouldn't advise that. So what you're doing is a bit dodgy, a bit dicey. Do you think it's because their insecurities and they're thinking about it from their life?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think people give advice from the place of their own experience. Yeah. And it's always with the best of intention, but we are limited by our own life experience. Yeah. And I think for our journey, I can look back in what it's been like to be in missions, and God hasn't asked us to jump off the deep end all at once. I think he's been really sweet with us in that way, that it has been steps of, it hasn't been sell everything and never come back and never see your family again. It's okay, what if you go for a couple weeks? Yeah. What if you go for a couple months? What if you take your kids this time? What if you sold your house? What if you didn't have a car? And it hasn't been all at once, but I do think as we've stepped, there's been a journey of recognizing how many things were a safety net, not because we were being irresponsible, but it allowed us to trust God a little bit less because we had this backup plan. Right. We had if it doesn't work out, then
we've always got this.
We're being responsible.
Yeah.
And I think as we've grown, even in really being able to trust God, God's asked bigger things of us of, okay, well, will you trust me if you don't have a house? Will you trust me? Right now we're in a season of, will you trust me if you don't have long-term visas for the country you live in? And that's pretty scary with a family.
Sure.
A lot of people advise to be in missions, you have to have that stability. You have to be in one place. You have to be grounded. And I don't think it's bad advice, but I think God has been on a journey with us of, if you don't have those things, will you trust me even still?
Yeah.
And I rather have that dependence on him than all the comforts that make it feel safe, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And I would agree with that. Just to kind of bring, again, viewers up to speed, you don't have to go into great detail, but where in the world have missions led you? And maybe touch on briefly what you've done in some of those areas in the world.
Yeah. In talking about the journey, which is maybe some of the theme, I don't feel like any of it was all that impressive at the time. But in steps of faithfulness, over the last 20 years, we've built up a bit of a resume of international ministry. And so as a single, mostly with YWAM, but also with a couple other organizations, I've volunteered in Kenya, Uganda, Morocco, India, Nepal, St. Vincent in the Caribbean. I think that was what I did before meeting Scott. And then Scott and I together were able to do short-term ministry work in Kenya and India. I went to Uganda without him, but we worked in Stockholm, Sweden. That was our first trip as a family. And then we traveled together in 2018 to Thailand, South Africa, Kenya, Sweden, England, Norway. So that was all, and I would say temporary ministry. And then since we've been in full-time ministry, we've lived in Haiti, Guatemala. We've done work in the Dominican Republic, out of Austin, Texas, Key West, Florida, and then New Zealand, Switzerland, Albania, full-time.
Where we are right now.
And then ministry has also opened up doors for, it's been sweet getting to live in Europe for the first time as a family, that even just driving from Switzerland to Albania, we crossed through 7 different countries, which I've never taken a road trip like that in the US, where just to get from one place we live to the other place we live, we actually travel through Italy, Croatia, Bosnia, Montenegro, Slovenia. So we've gotten to see more of the world as we've said yes to wherever God leads us next.
That's fantastic. And maybe touch on, because again, when people think of sort of ministry work, missionary work, the need out there is so varied, isn't it, in terms of the projects that you're working on. Can you maybe just touch on some of the things, the practical projects that you've been involved in as well?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. Scott and I have almost had 2 different scopes of ministry we've been a part of since we've been married or been in long-time ministry as a family. And one, I think we've worked with very tangible physical needs. So in Haiti, Scott's role was a project coordinator. I was a storyteller. And it really was, okay, we're working with people who are living in the effects of earthquakes and hurricanes and not having money for food and school. And so a lot of it really was, what are the tangible needs? Scott helped with a 300 unit housing project. Right. And we have got to work with disaster relief when there's been earthquakes in the Caribbean and different places. So that's been one aspect. And I think it's really interesting to see when there's a tangible need, how open people are to the gospel, because there's a very real, hey, we're not in control and we don't have everything. And so when you come with resources, people are really open to hear, hey, why are you here and why are you helping us? And so it's a really open door for the gospel when you're meeting practical, tangible needs.
Yeah.
Something that I was not expecting from working more in underdeveloped countries is, in the last few years, we worked in places like New Zealand and Switzerland and the UK and countries that seemingly don't have a physical need. There's good insurance, there's good healthcare, there's good jobs. So why do missions there? And I think I've seen so much actually in God, even breaking down my own stereotypes of spiritual need being connected to physical need.
Yeah.
And working across Europe, there's so much need for, man, what do you do in a country or a community where they have all of these physical needs met, but are still so hopeless or don't have joy or don't have purpose or don't have passion, and recognizing that there is this lie that if you have a good job or a house or a good education, you'll be content and you'll be complete. And so I would say working in more developed countries in Europe, like Switzerland, the ministry looks really different because we're having a lot of conversations with people about how life is more than all of those things. And it isn't about you striving for success, but allowing God to come in and transform your life from the inside out. I love both areas of ministry, but it stretches even from, sometimes I make the comparison from Switzerland to Albania, that in Switzerland, everyone I meet knows it's beautiful and knows the Swiss Alps and knows it as a beautiful tourist vacation spot. But you don't think about the need in a way that when you're a part of the community, you see the loneliness and the isolation and the, if you're not being productive, where's your purpose in life? That really spiritual darkness and heaviness. And then when we live in Albania half of the year, if people know about Albania, which many don't, they know about the corruption, they know about the gangs, they know about communism, they know about so much of the negativity that sometimes I feel like we come here and we're like exposing that, yes, those things are true, but do you know of the beauty? Do you know of the hospitality? Do you know that Albania has mountains and it has the sea and it has beautiful, kind people? And so it isn't to say that there isn't beauty and brokenness everywhere, but often I think what people already know about, sometimes what our family does is get to flip the script and show the other side of the narrative as well, and whatever pieces feel like are missing.
No, that's so important. And it's funny coming to Albania. I remember somebody said, when I mentioned that we were coming here, somebody had said, oh, you need to be really careful because of the gangs, this, that, and the other. And to be honest, this is our second time here. We've not experienced anything like that.
People assume it's so dangerous.
And it's so unbelievably not. People are so friendly, so welcoming. And, thank you for sharing that. The one thing I was going to mention to you there, because you said about England, more, you'd think, civilized countries, should we say. It opened up a conversation with Jody and I about missionary, and the question, because some people say that this isn't the case. We believe that missionary work can be done in your own hometown. You don't have to go to a war-torn country or to a poverty-stricken country, but you've kind of just answered that question by saying you came to the UK, where we live, and you could identify a need there as well. And I think that's so important for people to understand that need is everywhere. It just looks different. It just looks different to where.
And I also think there's something, it's interesting to where God is calling you. And I think it's important. And I've had conversations on both sides of how valuable it can be to be a voice in your hometown of someone who, when I think of the Albanians here, our ministry would not be what it is without local Albanians, without Kati and Abi and Sarah and Ailey and ones who know the culture, who know the context, who know the history in ways that we never will. They are missionaries in their hometown, right? I've also had conversations with people in Switzerland, how they feel like, in being a Christian, they can have different conversations about faith when they go.
Right.
That even just going from Switzerland to Spain, their voice holds more weight, or they're not the kid who was messing around in high school and getting into trouble. You know, sometimes you can be so well known in your hometown that you don't have a lot of voice of authority, because what does he know? Oh, he was just that kid who, you know, stole from my front yard when he was 13. So sometimes God is asking you to go just because you have more of a voice than people are giving you credit for. And I've seen both play out. And so it isn't a one or the other. I think the reality is that there is need everywhere. And one of the things I loved about the discipleship school I did with YWAM was, in Colorado Springs, it focused on the 1040 window. So the least reached countries, less than 3% Christian, where the least amount of funding was going for missionaries. It was really focused on sending missionaries to the least reached. And I loved that my training was in that place. I realized, looking back, that also came with a bit of arrogance, that I saw of, this is where ministry is important, and everywhere else, that's kind of where the safe Christians go. You know, if you're really a Christian, you'll go to the least reached nations. And if you want something safer or easier, that's when you'd go to Switzerland or England. Or I put God in a box. And our first mission trip we did as a family was to Stockholm, Sweden. And I was so excited to go. Tegan was 6 months old. But I also had to wrestle. I'm like, Sweden? God, Stockholm is one of the wealthiest cities in the world. Like, what need do they have? And I realized in that trip, God breaking down my walls to see the need in this postmodern area where this whole community didn't feel connected to God in any way. And honestly, how important ministry was, because in Sweden, people were so much more open to talk to foreigners than they were to talk to Swedish people. And I saw there, man, short-term ministry is a value, because we're opening up doors for the local church. That as a cold climate culture, it would be very strange for Swedish people to go up and talk to strangers. But as an American, people are curious. They want to know why we're there. They want to talk about faith. And you can't discredit ministry or going on missions in that way, I would say, because I had a stereotype that we wouldn't be of value there. And while we were there, I could see us opening up doors for the local church, even in just those 2 weeks, that it took foreigners coming in to be able to open doors for conversations that wouldn't have been there otherwise.
I think equally, I see that here in Albania with the project that we done at the school. And I think that the legacy from that is that door open, and the conversations and what will come of that. So what that project was, for those that don't know, we re-fenced the sort of 2 pitched areas. And it was great because kids can practically use that. So fundamentally that was good, but it's what comes from that. The door that's now been opened, I think, is basically what you're describing, is that's where the real work is going to start to come into its own.
It's been so interesting, just as we've been working at the school the last couple of weeks, hearing more conversations about how the church really hadn't had an open door. Like, the church had never done a project like this before with the school. Even volunteers coming to the school is not something that's ever happened before. It's not commonplace. And so I think we are able to break down even misconceptions.
Yeah.
The church, I think, assumed that the school didn't want to let them in. And I think the school was a little nervous about a group of Christians coming and being weird or being, I don't know, doing things that they would not agree with.
Sure.
And so they had this hands up approach to letting in foreigners. And then with this need, kind of letting us come in and meet it and seeing how well everything went and how hard we worked and the community getting involved. I'm so excited to see what projects and even what conversations come down the road, because I feel like now there's this open line of communication where there's trust and respect and there's a partnership that wasn't there a couple weeks ago. That's going to continue so much longer than our team working on the fence, right?
And that literally, that's a seed that's been planted.
Yeah.
It seems being involved in it it's a big seed. It was a big project, but it literally was a seed because it is what's going to come from that.
Yeah.
And that's that was quite amazing. Thank you for letting us be a part of that as well. I'm interested to know, from your journey over the past couple of decades, has your view on church and faith, has that evolved greatly, do you think? Have you learned drastically more? I mean, I know you will have learned a lot from it, but has your view changed in God from perhaps what you were brought up to believe in church? And when you then go back home and you visit the church again, is there a different perspective?
Sometimes I feel like with my journey in faith, there comes a depth of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And more than it being I didn't know and then I did, it's kind of a spiral in that I knew God was loving and I knew God was kind. But then when I learned that all over again in another ring of, oh, now I have a deeper understanding. And almost in a way where I think it can be compared to, when you marry your spouse, I loved Scott as much as I could possibly love him on the day we got married. I was all in. That was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And my depth of love for him is so much more than it was 15 years ago. But that was as much as I thought I could love him then, right? So I think in my journey with God, it hasn't been that I didn't know anything or that it was wrong, but I think God is just so much bigger and greater that I only have so much level for capacity. And as my capacity grows, I do think I'm understanding more and more of God's character and just trusting in it more because I've seen him come through time after time. I have my own stories of faithfulness, not just other people's stories of faithfulness. I think what can look different in going home after being in ministry is everyone's on their own journey. I think some people are taking more risks. Some people are taking more steps of faith. Some people really want their faith to be safe and steady and consistent. And so sometimes, again, even like we touched on, I don't always take everyone's advice. Because if someone's advice is to stay safe and to stay steady and to not take risks, that is not where I've grown the closest to God.
Right.
So I know that I've experienced more depth in my relationship with Jesus when I've taken risks and when I've let go of things and when I've
had to lean on him
and not known what we're stepping into, right? Like I've seen God show up in that. I think sometimes back home, I have to step into what other people's experience with faith has been. And it is always good to stay in a position as a learner and to stay humble. And there are so many things I learned from other people in their journey with, battles with sickness. And I have friends who have walked through, cancer, have walked through loss of a child, have lost jobs, have lost so many different things that have not looked like what my faith journey has looked like. And it's been really hard for them. And I think there are things that we can relate on with God's character
Yeah.
without having the same journey to get there. And I would say for us in missions, we've had experiences with being foreigners in a new country and not speaking the same language and not having visas, or, getting pulled unexpectedly because of political unrest. That's been our journey with God.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that someone who hasn't experienced those things doesn't have a depth of faith.
Sure.
But they might be walking it out through caring for, the death of a parent, or having to lay down different things at home for the good of those that they love. And so I think the biggest way I'm encouraged when I go home and see the church at work is to see what it looks like for the body of Christ living out their faith. And it's okay that it's not all the same. I know more than anyone, we need people in hometowns. We need people in occupations. We need people in business and in education and in, building churches. But I really love to get to the heart of those stories of, okay, how have you grown this year?
Yeah.
Like what? And usually the most growth comes from the hardest places. And so even if people haven't sacrificed in the same way that we've sacrificed, what I love hearing about the most is, okay, what have been the challenging experiences you've walked through where you've seen God show up? Yeah. And for us, it can be really tangible based on what country we live in. It's really obvious on the outside. I think a lot of people have those battles that aren't as apparent. And if they're really leaning into who Jesus is in that, then their faith is growing at that same depth of understanding as ours has been.
That kind of leads me in, because I wanted to ask you, is there a particular time that you can recall, a difficult time that you recall, and you, I wouldn't say that your faith was questioned, but the situation was just so challenging and you almost felt perhaps like going home, giving up on missions. And how did God meet you in that time?
Yeah, great question. We have definitely been through hard times. Mm-hmm. I think when we learned we couldn't move back to Guatemala after a year of living there during COVID and building a family there, at that point in ministry was one of the most difficult things we'd ever experienced. It felt like the floor dropped out from under us. Mm-hmm. But there was something in that, and even mourning the loss of not only what we lost, but there was a mourning of the dreams we had to come, of mm-hmm. things we thought would happen there, things we thought we would be a part of. That was really challenging, but it also, I would say, felt external from our family, and that it was the situation that was happening to us. It was a organizational split. We did feel loved by the ministries we worked with, but it was a situation out of our control.
Right.
Really hard, but no one to blame. A year later, after we weren't living in Guatemala, 2 years later, we moved to New Zealand. And that was the most challenging thing in ministry we ever experienced. And it was so different because it felt incredibly personal. Mm-hmm. And when we couldn't move back to Guatemala and all that happened, it was so hard, but we knew we wanted to be in ministry. And we just knew things were out of our control and it was out of our hands. In New Zealand, there were things that were falling apart with leadership and at the YWAM base we were working with. And it all got directed at us. That we were the ones causing the problems, that we were the ones causing disunity, that it was our fault. And at that season, it was really hard to gauge what was true. It was really hard to discern if we were these people that we were being told by our leaders. And that I for sure can remember was the closest of us walking away and thinking, God, if we really are these people, even unintentionally, if we're making things worse, if things are falling apart because our family showed up, maybe we should just stop. If we go home, maybe all of this would get better. And that really was a lie that we wrestled through in our own identity, that if we are people that are causing breakage in ministry, then we shouldn't be in ministry anymore. And it took, honestly, in that season, a lot of people who knew us and knew us well speaking truth over us. I remember having phone calls with people from back home who had to speak over me the truth of who I was when I couldn't remember it for myself. And I didn't know if all of this brokenness was because of me. And I think stepping out of that season and getting light on more of the situation that happened, more of the sin that was being covered up, more of the brokenness that was happening in that place, I recognized what a loss it would have been for us to leave ministry at that time, because I think some of the biggest lessons I've learned in ministry and leadership came from a season of being hurt by it and learning what not to do, and learning the importance of how to lead people in Christ-centered community. And being in a season when it was so hard, it's almost like the lessons you learn from your parents that you don't want to pass on to your kids, right? Like the things that stuck that were so painful. And I remember having these conversations with God that we were so beat up, we could have walked away. We could have been done. But then who else was going to walk in an opposite spirit of this bad leadership? I think one of the fights we actually had to lay down when you see hurt and brokenness happening is, especially Scott and all of his righteous anger, you want to fix it. You want to get the bad guys out and put the good guys in and save the day. And we wanted to see the whole thing resolved.
Right.
And one of the hardest things in that season was actually listening when God said it wasn't our fight anymore, and when it was our time to walk away, even though things weren't all resolved and not everything had been made right, and not every leader was taken out of leadership. All the things that we wanted to fix, we had to trust that was actually God's battle.
That must have been tough.
Yeah, because we want to fix it. You see the solution, right? And sometimes I don't love that God is so long-suffering and allows things to play out where I want to do things fast. And but I almost got placed in me, nothing against negative leadership I've experienced, but if it's not my job to take all of them out, what is my job to walk in a way that I do feel like is biblical and I do feel like is spirit-led, and I want to be a leader that is putting more Christ-centered community out into the world. And if we quit, if we go home, not that we can't love the people around us there, but I don't feel like we're fully taking all the lessons we learned and applying it. I kind of felt like the bad guys win. You know, the sin in the world, not the people, but the sin caused us to quit instead of take what we learned and do it differently and walk in an opposite spirit.
Yeah, I think that, learning, being teachable is so vitally important in all walks of life. And sometimes it's quite humbling, I'm sure, as you just described. But it does help that growth with God, that deeper connection with God, for sure. And it's when we start to think that we know when we actually don't, is when you start to walk a dangerous path. As difficult as it may be, and as you've just described, that must have been a tremendously difficult time just to say, this is now beyond me, God, this is yours now to deal with. And I think by human nature, a lot of us just do want to fix things. But yeah, it's not always our battle, is it?
No, and learning what is our place. And even in that journey in New Zealand, what's interesting that I can tell, and maybe it's kind of fueled the ministry we're a part of now, is when the hard was about Scott and I was willing to walk away. That if it's okay, if it's about us, if it's a personality thing, if it's a culture thing, if it's a misunderstanding, we'll just walk away.
Yeah.
When it became about other people and their faith, when it became about students that we deeply cared about, and we saw them wrestling if this Christianity was something they still wanted to be a part of, if this is what Jesus looked like, is it what they want? When we saw the wrestle of these young people we love deciding, hey, maybe I don't want this anymore.
Yeah.
I think that's when we knew, okay, we're not going anywhere.
Yeah. Well, that's different. That's talking about your reputation and Jesus's reputation.
Yeah.
Reputation, and that's something that's not questionable. That's when you remove the self, isn't it? And you have to stick up for what you believe in. I can understand that. That's a harder one to walk away from, for sure. For sure. You mentioned Tegan in one of the conversations, so we seem prudent just to bring up the rest of the family. So,
it's true.
Because it's not just I'm interviewing you, but there's more to your family. So, in terms of the kids, I'm interested to know how. Well, you can fill us in, obviously, what ages they were when you started, but what has life been, do you think, like for them on mission? How has it impacted them growing up?
Really, you should just have them on your next podcast.
Probably.
Because they'd probably offer way more mature insight than I have. But I think, again, it's been one yes at a time as we've stepped out in faith. It hasn't been, okay, we committed that their entire childhood we're going to be in overseas ministry. We were not there. I think Scott and I had both done a little bit of ministry with YWAM, doing a discipleship training school before we got married. When we were newlyweds, we had entertained the idea of coming on staff, but ended up, for that season, running a company instead. Scott took partnership of an arborist business. So we really had a fork in the road decision when I was 24 at the time. Do we go into full-time ministry, or do we pursue a business opportunity? And I absolutely remember at that time praying so hard to God just show us, okay, what's the right way and what's the wrong way? And that was not a right and wrong answer decision. It was I'm with you, and these are going to be really different.
Yeah.
But you get to decide what this looks like. So I know for us, ultimately, when we decided to stay in Nebraska and start a family and run a business, that changed what life for Jonah and Tegan looked like at that time. So Jonah is now 14, Tegan is 12. They both have birthdays next month, so they're about to age up. But I would say the first 5 years of their life were very normal. We bought a house, Scott ran a company, we had a boat, we lived close to family, and I'm really grateful for that season. We walked through a season of my mom getting sick with breast cancer. My sister walked through some difficult times. And so even looking back, in the good and the hard, I'm really grateful we were at home during that time, because it built a foundation of family and where Jonah and Tegan are from. And I really want them to know where they're from and mostly the family that they're a part of. So when they were 5 and 7 years old, we set off on what we call now our big adventure trip. And that was 9 months of volunteering as a family. We set out west, and then we came home east. So we literally went around the world, and we traveled for 9 months from Thailand to South Africa to Kenya, England, Norway, Sweden. And I think that was a season of knowing that Scott and I had a heart for overseas missions, doing ministry full-time, having no idea what that looked like with the kids, and no idea if it would totally screw them up. And what if we go to Asia for a couple months and they hate it and they're turned upside down? So we didn't know what would come of that. We just knew we had honestly come to a point where the American dream wasn't it for us. The house and the boat and the business was not as fulfilling as the world maybe promised it would be. And we felt like we were losing a part of who God had created us to be in just pursuing those things. So we went for a season. I mean, we had a return date. We had people renting our house. To me, that was a step. And it was a scary step.
Yeah.
But it was really to see how Jonah and Tegan did overseas at that young age. Mm-hmm. We knew we could homeschool for 9 months. Tegan was 5, so she hadn't even started kindergarten yet. The pressure felt low.
Yeah.
And we came home from that healthier than we had ever been, and closer as a family than we had ever been, more connected. The stories we shared, just the time, the thousands of hours together, I wouldn't trade for anything. Even if that was our whole experience in overseas ministry, it was such a sweet period for our family. I would say seeing how well Jonah and Tegan did to change and to new cultures and to not speaking the language, all these things that we tested the waters on. When we came back from that big adventure trip, we knew we wanted to pursue it more.
Okay.
From there, when we took our next ministry position, that was a 1-year commitment. It was 1 year of moving to Haiti. And so recognizing it wasn't, this is where they're going to live their entire childhood. This is where they're going to graduate. It was, okay, I think we can try 1 year, and I don't know if this is going to screw them up, but let's see. Maybe we can reverse the damage if it's really bad. And so we have done it a year at a time. And I think part of the reason we're still in overseas ministry is seeing how our kids have responded to it. You could sit down and interview with them and they could tell you all the things that are challenging. Yeah. I would do no service to say it's been easy or it's all been light. Mm-hmm. They've made so many sacrifices in their decade of life. But I do think like their maturity, their service for others, the way they see the world, those are things I didn't know how to teach as a parent. I didn't know how to teach empathy. I didn't know how to teach understanding. And so the fact that they've seen things and experienced things, in some ways it's taken a pressure off me as a parent to try to explain it all. Yeah. And we've just walked through different places in life, having this ongoing conversation of like, okay, what does this mean? And what does that mean about yourself and about God and about family? And I think if anything, it's their sense of normalcy is just a lot broader than I think a lot of teenage kids growing up in the United States.
Yeah, I can imagine so. And they're obviously older now. I mean, your decisions in terms of what you do next, are they involved in that, or is it still very much you and Scott? Because obviously they get into that, they're very much aware of their surroundings and they have their own wants and needs now, they're teenagers. Yeah. So how do you navigate that as a family? Is it that you all sit down and agree, right, we're going to do this, we're not going to do this? You know, what happens if some people want to do this and some people don't? In terms of moving on or continuing mission, how does that look? What does that look like?
In some respects, they have always had a say. Mm-hmm. And that has been important to us in that we've never wanted ministry to be something that happened to them. Mm-hmm. They've always had a role in the decision-making part. Mm-hmm. Now, I would say the difference between 5-year-old Tegan and now almost 13-year-old Tegan.
Sure, it's going to be very different.
I think elementary school age, Scott and I got pretty good at pitching ideas. Yeah. So they would be in the conversation, but it's amazing, you know, even with the heartbreak of not being able to move back to Guatemala and us as parents carrying the weight of, oh man, we don't get to move back to a place our kids love. Okay, but in Haiti, we did learn that they can adopt baby goats. Yeah. And they've always wanted a pet. We can't get a dog yet, but we can get goats. Yeah. And somehow then when we talk about that, they're really excited to move to Haiti.
Sales pitching.
So there's a bit of finesse
Yeah.
in that. I think the older they've gotten, the less it's about, let us sell you what we think is best for the family. It has always been okay, as a family, and especially for Scott and I think it's really important to have a pulse check on how are we doing? Like, even, it's okay to have good days and bad days, but overall, like, are we living above the line or below the line?
Sure.
It's okay to have days where you feel lonely, but are you living in a state of loneliness?
Yeah.
You know, there is a matter of, okay, is this too hard? And we've had times that even Scott and I have been okay, but we've felt the sacrifice that the kids have made for not having consistent friendships, not having, you know, not being a part of sports teams, not having the normalcy that other kids get to grow up in. And we carry the weight of like, okay, not all normal is good, but are we asking them to sacrifice too much for this?
Sure.
So I think as they get older, they're in the conversation more. And it's not so much of, do you want to live in Nebraska or do you want to live in Albania? But more, what feels most important in this season? Is what's most important being connected to a community? Is what's most important having a youth group and peers? Is what's most important feeling a sense of purpose or getting to be outside and rock climb and learn how to go hiking? And so I think as they get older, like, we are valuing their needs even higher, and also recognizing in a season that they're not going to be a part of our household all that much longer. They'll always be our kids, but where we decide to live, what Scott and I decide ministry looks like, really only directly affects them about 5 more years. So we're taking their perspective into account all the greater, knowing I've already shelved things. Like, I love the idea of working more with disaster response, more with working in really hard to get to places that they might kick you out of, places you might only have a short visa stay. I think God has wired us for some of those difficult spaces. I don't think that's a yes, we're going to accept right now while the kids are starting high school, because it affects them too much. And so I know for myself, I do have a personality who tends to want to go all the places and do all the things. If you tell me about opportunities anywhere in the world, I can get excited about it. And so for me, part of parenting is honing in. It's okay to be excited about new opportunities and potential, but it's not always what's best for them to go here, there. And one thing we actually haven't mentioned yet that's super important, and I think has been so healthy for our whole family, is that there's not just 4 of us, there's 5 of us.
That was coming up, but yes, go for it.
There are 5 of us, and in New Zealand, in the hardest season of ministry we've ever been in, God gave us the sweetest blessing of our now 3-year-old dog, who we adopted in New Zealand, who travels the world with us. Her name is Journey. And more than companionship and adventure, I mean, she's the best dog we could have ever asked for. And I honestly think she added a level of stability and consistency that Jonah and Tegan desperately needed. From starting over and doing life in new countries and new places. It's interesting how just having a dog, a live-in best friend who comes with you wherever you go, and even changes our decisions of, you know, we love Thailand. We can't go there next month because it doesn't make sense how to fly there with a dog. There are things Journey kind of forces us to say no to that I think are probably best for Jonah and Tegan, that I might not have that filter if it wasn't a physical, slow down, you have a dog now. She can travel a lot of places. She can go back and forth with the US to us, and we have a van so we can drive across Europe. But, you know, we love Kenya, and I can't work out in my head how to go back to Kenya right now because I don't know how to drive Journey to Kenya. So maybe that isn't our yes now. Maybe that's in a couple years from now, and that's okay too. So as a family, I think it is important to make decisions together. And one thing I've tried to do well is listen to what's important to them without putting the weight of decision on their shoulders, without putting the responsibility of what happens next, where are we going to land, what are we going to do. Yeah. They don't need to carry that. Yeah. But I do feel like without a voice, I want them to look back at this season. And I know there's going to be hard that has shaped them, but I want them to be able to see how God was in it. Yeah. And if they only remember the hard things, then we missed something in this ministry journey.
And also the fact that they can look back and feel that they were involved in it rather than being dragged by their parents. I think that's quite important. And so you mentioned the kids, you mentioned Journey, and you have mentioned Scott throughout. We spoke about this the other day, and I just wanted to ask this. Scott and you.
Yeah.
You mentioned to me the other night you were going on a date night. That was the first date night in a little while.
It sure was.
So how do you, in everybody's life, we have to navigate everything, but people have jobs, kids go to school, husbands and wives, we've got to navigate all these things anyway. But on mission, do you feel, is it harder? Is it not harder to try and find that time to connect for yourselves?
Yeah. One of my favorite things about working in ministry is that we get to do it together. Mm-hmm. I don't take for granted the fact that I get to see my husband and my kids every single day. I know a lot of families don't have that and would love that. Yeah. There is a misconception that just because I see Scott every single day, there's a lot that comes in with leadership and co-working, and sometimes we're just high-fiving and downloading information. And so, yes, there's still a quantity time does not always mean quality time. Yeah. I do love that we get quantity time. I love that I know the people that are in his life and he knows the people in my life, and we feel connected in that way. I think something I recognized early on, probably when we lived in Guatemala, and we lived there during COVID, so the whole world was shut down. We couldn't travel. We couldn't go back and forth to the US. And I really recognized there that there's something incredibly important about learning how to rest where you're at. Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest mistake, one of the biggest mistakes in ministry, is you see people who are holding their breath. Right. And they're serving and they're pouring out, but it's this idea of, I'm going to do all the things here, and then when I go home, that's when I'll take me time, or that's when I'll rest and I'll recharge. And I think that's a really dangerous misconception, because if you're holding your breath to get back to a place to get rest, one, what if that doesn't happen? Sure. What if you don't get back? But also that means that you're going for whole seasons without ever resting. Yeah. And I don't think God designed where it's like you said, there's not, this is the ministry field and this is the rest field. I honestly, one of the big reasons we took a date night this week is because we're going back to the US next month, and that's a different ministry field. I want to go to the United States rested enough that I can be engaged with my church family there, that I can be invested in my family, that I don't feel like I'm going to check out for 4 weeks because I want to be a good friend for those people. Yeah. And to do that, I have to rest here. Yeah. I have to take a night off sometimes. We have to slow down. Yeah. And probably the best advice I could give for anyone in ministry is learn how to do that where you're at, and learn how to do it even when you're overseas. And maybe it's just finding one restaurant that feels special, or we found a hotel down the way that has a spa with a hot tub, but it's $20 and it just feels like we're in a different world. Yeah. Right? And those are the things. It doesn't have to be a holiday. It doesn't have to be this big vacation. But the idea of waiting to rest until you get to a certain place, I think puts a lot of pressure on, because what if you get there and it's not restful? Exactly. What if you get there and it's hard? What if you get there and you don't get that space? Yeah. So, and for us, Nebraska will always be where we're from. And we love getting to go see our family and our friends. But the word home takes on a really different meaning because I don't know what going home, coming to Albania feels like coming home sometimes. Yeah. And now that we've lived in Switzerland the last 2 years, when we go there in 2 weeks, it's going to feel a bit like coming home.
Yeah.
There's a hard in starting over in so many places. I would say on the flip side of that coin, there's a lot of places around the world now that feel like home. And the more places we've planted roots, the more I've learned how to rest in all of those places. That I feel like if we went back to the UK next year, I would know how to rest there in a way I didn't this year. Because we were brand new and meeting everyone. And now I'd go back and say, oh, I know the places that just feel familiar.
Yeah.
And even if you're in a new place, finding those familiar places to take some time off is really healthy for longevity.
Yeah. I mean, there's that saying is you can't give from an empty cup.
Yeah.
And you do need to refill that cup now and again. And also, I get, I feel that I understand what you say about home. For me, I'll say I'm going home here, which is back to the house, because that's where we're physically staying, but that's where my family is. That's where we as a family are going. So to me, wherever I'm putting my head down, if I'm with my family, that's home on that particular night. I'll equally talk about I'm heading back home, as into Northern Ireland, because that's where I'm from, just like you with Nebraska. I think traveling, we've done a lot of traveling when we were younger, and home does take a different perspective when you travel a lot. But to me, it's where you're at with your family.
And I think it's something worth noting, family in ministry. I think I wasn't full-time single. I had done a number of trips, 3 months here, 3 months there. I had never lived full-time overseas.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember it was much easier by myself.
Sure.
It was also honestly a lot lonelier.
Yeah.
There were times where I did feel really disconnected, really isolated. I think you learn a different facet of God's character in those places. I think it's okay to be a single missionary and be lonely.
Yeah.
I think God meets you in those spots of, hey, I'm the one who's going to meet these needs.
Yeah.
But there were different challenges of feeling like no one understood the people I met or the places I were or the experiences I'd had.
Yeah.
Being in ministry as a family and with a dog, it's more complicated. Yeah. It costs more money.
Yeah.
There are more people's feelings to consider.
Yeah.
But there is a richness of, I don't struggle with loneliness, and I don't really even struggle with feeling misunderstood or feeling like I don't fit in. And there's something about the unit that we are even in seasons past where, my kids and I, we can share about our friends from Haiti in a way that no one with YWAM St. Moritz knows.
Yeah.
But we know those people. We know what it was like living on a ship in Key West, Florida, and how weird it was, taking the rib boat out and seeing Nerf sharks. And there are things that as you experience it as a family, it brings us closer, that it doesn't make it easier, but there's a richness that I wouldn't trade for doing it as a single person.
Yeah, no.
And I think sometimes, just like before you have kids, sometimes you count the cost of all the hard things, of, I'm going to lose sleep and it's going to cost more money and I'm going to have less freedom. But you don't actually get to see all the good things you're getting until it happens.
That's right.
And with so much, you can count the cost of what you're sacrificing, and then you do it and you're like, man, it's so fun, these experiences we've had together as a family, that I think will be a part of our DNA for the next 50 years,
Yeah, no, for sure. I can see that. No, absolutely. I got a couple more questions that I wanted to we've gone through quite a lot of them. But that's all good. All good. Misconceptions of life on mission. Have you come up with any misconceptions in terms of what people's own thoughts are when they're talking to you and they perceive, oh, it must be like this for you, or you mustn't get this, or you must do that, or perhaps maybe that comes more from people back home? Have you had any conversations with people that have misconceptions of what life as a missionary is
Yeah.
like?
Yeah.
What would be the sort of the common misconceptions?
Well, the hard thing is even life in missions, we've lived a lot of different lives, right? And living in Haiti in missions does not look the same as living in Switzerland or Albania or Thailand. So probably the most common misconception is that there's a one size fits all.
Yeah.
And I know a misconception that I really struggled with that I think came from conversations in the church is that to be a missionary, you move overseas,
Mm-hmm.
you're probably in some sort of church planting team,
Mm-hmm.
you learn the language, and you're there for at least 5 years.
Right.
But probably more. Like, to be a good missionary, you go somewhere, you plant a church, and that's where you stay.
Yeah.
And I'm not against that form of ministry at all. I think there are a lot of missionaries doing huge kingdom work who do that very thing. They go, they learn a language, they're a part of a community for a decade or more.
Mm-hmm.
What was really hard for our family is when I tried to adopt that understanding for myself.
Right.
We've been doing it wrong for a very long time.
Mm.
Because even the places that we tried to stay, like Guatemala and Haiti and New Zealand and even Switzerland, we have been unable to do so as a family.
Right.
Sometimes we've been pulled out. Sometimes we've been asked to leave. In our current situation, we just don't have the visas to stay long term. And I have had to fight a voice in my head that tells me that if I was doing ministry the right way, we would have landed by now. We would have a spot, we would know the language, and we wouldn't move back and forth because that's what people do until they settle down and get serious.
Right. Okay.
That's what it's felt like. And I think well-meaning people have given that advice when they see us in new countries that it doesn't fit their expectation of ministry. Because why would we be in Africa and Asia and the Caribbean and now Europe? It doesn't always look cohesive. And I think for us, we've had to just keep saying yes when it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I think God has done a number of healing in me in the, well, when did I say you're doing it wrong? Kind of that, who told you that? Who told you there was one way? And even as I wrestled with, for early on after YWAM, I really felt like to be in ministry, you were supposed to be called to a country. You're supposed to be called to Albania or called to Turkey or called to even Muslims. And I don't feel like I've ever gotten that specific calling on my life to a people group or to a place. And if that's what you're waiting for and you don't get it, it can feel like you missed the mark. And I've had to learn that God is bigger, that even if he can give you a calling to a specific place and a specific people group, for our family, I can see, and part of the reason he didn't is because it's been so much more than just one place. And it's been about the people that God has led us to around the world. And in that, we're really open-handed to what God leads us to next, because it's not just in a box of, we're only going to work in the parameters that we've set. Again, not to say that to be in one place is wrong, but I think I've wrestled with the misconceptions of, do people think it's because we just can't commit somewhere, or because we can't learn a language, or we can't settle down, or we're not submitting to leadership, all of these things that if we were doing it right, we would stay. And actually, in truth, I think our biggest sacrifice that we've made is continuing to choose to be in ministry when we haven't gotten the security of just being in one place.
So my thought on that is that, we're all different.
Yeah.
God has different plans for each of us. God speaks to us in different ways and speaks to us through other people, through opportunities also. So my thought on that is that, yes, some people are called for long-term ministry and other people are called for short-term ministry. Maybe they're going to stay on short-term. Maybe they're on short-term until they figure out what their long-term is. But the point being is that everyone's on their own journey with God. Mm-hmm. Everyone's moving towards focusing on God, keeping God as their flag, their mast to walk towards. But their journey there individually looks different. So there shouldn't be, therefore, a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah.
And because we are all different and we are wired differently, I see you guys and hear from what I know of you and hear your stories, I can see how adaptable you are, and that makes you the perfect fit for short-term, whether that's weeks, months, year. It makes you the perfect fit to adapt into all these different situations. Mm-hmm. Whereas perhaps people that are long-term ministry just aren't wired that way. And that's absolutely fine. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that at all, but we're just different and we're on different journeys, but our ultimate goal is the same. Yeah. I was curious to know if you've picked up any of these misconceptions along the way.
And even it's okay. You have to recognize, even in the world of ministry, mm-hmm. if you have a missions board at your church or, a missions pastor, there can still be misconceptions of what that looks like from their experience, right? Like if they have experience leading short-term trips, that's going to look different than long-term church planting. Mm-hmm. Or if they have experience working in medical ministry, that looks different than building projects and construction. And Scott and I, one thing we know is our skill sets sometimes are a little unconventional in the missionary fit, in that, Scott got his Christian ministry degree. He went to school for 3 years while working full time. And we laughed that he walked away from that. And he's like, well, I'm not going to be a pastor. I don't like writing sermons. I don't like preaching. That's not my gift. Mm-hmm. But if I'm not a pastor, and we're definitely not worship leaders, and we're not children's directors, okay, so where do we fit? Like, that's kind of what makes the church, right? Like, there are these boxes. And even in ministry, it's like overseas, okay, so are you going to preach, or are you going to help with children? And we're pretty adaptable that we can do just about anything people ask of us. But I think as we've gotten older, it's feeling the freedom to step into what are we good at. Okay, I much rather get to meet with a family and tell their story and raise sponsorship for a building project. Then Scott leads that building project and helps build their house than, running a vacation Bible school. Yeah. I can assist someone else running a vacation Bible school, but my skills look different. Yeah. And I think the more people you get to meet in this world of Christian ministry and recognize that, okay, man, I love worship pastors and they are killing it in so many ways. But if that's not what my role looks like, is what I'm doing still valuable? Yeah. And I think a lot of people recognize the places they don't fit before they actually see, oh, this is a lane that's really good for me. Yeah. And
I don't think there's any harm in pushing into different areas, because how else do you find where you fit?
No, you try them on.
Exactly that. I'm going to maybe wrap it up with asking you, we've done a few of these interviews now, and I've kind of ended it with this, is there a particular piece of scripture that you've always leant on, or perhaps is there a piece of scripture that you're leaning on particularly now that's helped you through? There's lots to choose from.
I know. And it's funny, as we've talked about the journey and seasons, is I have different scriptures that have marked kind of different periods. And so it's interesting when you think about like the scripture that feels the most pressing now, because there's so many good ones, right? The Bible's a good book. There's a lot of wisdom in there. Yeah. One scripture I should share just in our story, and even full circling it from when I first felt like, God spoke to me that you can do this, in the back of a church in the slum of Kibera in Kenya. That same month, the pastor that I was working with, he wrote me a note, and in it, he quoted the verse from Romans 10 that says, how beautiful are the feet of those who go to preach the good news. And more than that verse was really the meaning of that whole passage is, anyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. But how can they be saved if people don't go? And how will they go if they're not called? And really the idea in this letter that the pastor wrote was not just that I would be blessed, but that the people on my path, that as I journeyed forward, the people I met, no matter where in the world I would, that they would be blessed.
Yeah.
And so I got that tattooed to my foot, actually, because I was like, I want to remember that it's not the blessing for me, but that God promises to bless the people in my path when I step out in faithfulness.
That's beautiful.
Now I think, honestly, I keep going back to, it's a short beauty is John 3:30. And it's a bit of a mantra verse that is just that he become greater and I become less. It's actually from the mouth of John the Baptist, but I think of it all the time in just what it looks like to lead a team and what it looks like to be in cross-cultural environments where I get it wrong all the time and I don't always understand everything and I miscommunicate, and just my prayer under my breath is, God, that like, Jesus, you become greater and me become less. And I know I've gotten it wrong and I know I probably said things out of turn and I didn't do things right, but like that's not what people remember. That they remember Jesus in whatever part of that showed.
Sure.
So I really continue to lean into in whatever comes next that he become greater and I become less.
That's fantastic. I really like that. Jill, for people that are really interested to find out more about you, we'll put some links in below.
Great.
But what's the best way for people to find out about you, get in touch with you, help support you in your mission?
I mean, they can always text us. We're not shy people, so you can give anybody my phone number. We're on, if you want to get a hold of the family, call me, because bless Scott, he won't probably text you back right away. And so for photos of our family, we're on Instagram, The Henn Adventures, on Facebook. Photography is something I love to do. It's something I've got to do in past seasons. So I try to make a point to do photos. We send monthly updates of the ministry that we're a part of. Anyone's welcome to get our emails on a monthly basis. I'm the communicator in the family, so I try to make sure there's at least correspondence from time to time going out in the world. Scott is lovely in person, so if you want to meet with him and hang out with him face to face, he'll buy you a coffee, but he probably won't email you back. So I'm the one to get in touch with first.
Yeah.
And then we'll all sit down and hang out together, right?
Super. Well, we'll put some of the links in that people can get in touch with you and support you and pray for you and moving forward. But Jill, thank you so much for joining us on the Muddy Cross podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And we wish you the very best moving forward.
Thanks.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us in this episode. We really appreciate it. Remember to hit that share and subscribe button as well. And if you want to support us, you can do that in the link down below. Buy us a coffee. Until the next time, stay rooted in Christ, stay strong, and we'll see you soon. Bye.